a friendship that'll never ever end.
Run!
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Reaction Beanie Yo 553. That in that neighborhood, my brothers and sisters. This Thursday is a very special Thursday because we get to go back to the man. We get to go back to the myth. We get to go back to the legend, MrBallen. MrBallen on a Thursday, y'all. And the title of the video is Top 5 Bingeable Scary Stories, True Nightmares Edition. Now, this is such a vague title, man, especially coming from MrBallen. You know what I'm saying, man? These top 5 scary stories could be anything under the sun, like seriously. And best believe they gonna be very strange, they gonna be very dark, and they gonna be very mysterious. And I'm just ready to check it out. But before we check it out, my brothers and sisters, y'all know what y'all got to do. Get whatever you may need. Get what you need, please. We back to the man, the myth, the legend, MrBallen. Y'all got what y'all need. Y'all ready to go? Then let's go.
Today we have another special bonus video for you. It'll be a collection of 5 more fan favorite nightmare-inducing stories. And don't worry if you've heard or seen these before, because we have totally re-edited all of them, so the viewing experience will be all new. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and reverse all their toilet paper rolls, so instead of feeding out from the top, they feed out from underneath like a serial killer. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories.
Ballen! The lamp.
In 2004, Mitch was in his final semester at a college in Louisiana when he met another senior, a wonderful young lady named Kayla. From the instant he saw her, he knew he was in love. She played hard to get at first, but after several months, he won her over. After graduation, the pair stayed in Louisiana and moved in together while they got their careers off the ground. 2 years later, the pair got married, and almost immediately, Kayla got pregnant. At the time, Mitch's career was really starting to take off, which allowed Kayla to stay at home and take some time off. By the time their daughter was born, Mitch was making so much money that Kayla decided to just stay home and be a full-time mom. A couple years later, Kayla got pregnant again, and by the time their daughter was 2 years old, they had their son. Mitch adored his children. Every morning before he went to work, he would sneak into their room and he would watch them sleep, and then in the evenings they would have these big family sit-down meals and then play games together until bedtime. Mitch's life was perfect. Shortly after his son's birth, Mitch was lounging on the couch in his TV room when he noticed out of the corner of his eye the red lamp in the corner of the room. It just looked funny. It was almost like the light itself was blurry, but when he looked a little bit closer at it, the entire lamp looked blurry. And so Mitch looked around the room and nothing else was blurry. He rubbed his eyes and looked back over at this lamp and it was still blurry. He turned the TV off and walked over to the lamp, and even though he was right in front of it, the lamp was still blurry. And Mitch didn't have bad eyesight, and so he's thinking, is there something wrong with me? Am I having a stroke? Do I have an aneurysm? Is there some sort of illness here that's making me see this lamp blurry when it's really not? But Mitch told himself he was healthy and that whatever this was, it was an anomaly and nothing to worry about. And so he went back over to the couch, turned the TV back on, and tried to ignore the lamp.
Man, if that was to happen to me, y'all, and maybe his children is too young, and maybe his wife gone away. I don't know if MrBallen said his wife at the house or not. But somebody else, dope. I don't care if I gotta go knock on my neighbor door and tell them, man, come here, man, and tell me, are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing when I look at this freaking lamp? Do it look crazy as hell to you, or am I tripping? Like, I would need somebody else to let me know am I tripping or not. Like, dope. Let's go.
But as he was watching TV, out of his peripheral vision, he couldn't help but notice this weird blurry lamp. And so finally, he turned the TV off again, and he turned to look at this lamp. And now, in addition to being blurry, it appeared to be upside down. Now Mitch was genuinely concerned that there was something wrong with him, because again, nothing else in the entire room was blurry or upside down. It was just this lamp. And so a few minutes later, his wife and his kids came home, and Mitch decided he would not tell them about this lamp. He didn't want to alarm them. He figures he will get to the bottom of this blurry lamp, and then he will tell his wife and kids. And so that...
But I'm saying though, like, the wife and kids ain't noticing that it's upside down either. Even if you don't tell them about the lamp when they come home, they should see if the lamp, they should notice that the damn lamp is upside down and it's blurry. You know what I'm saying? That right there will let me know that I'm tripping. That's almost one of those cases where I ain't gonna even say nothing to my wife. I'm just gonna see if she notice it. And if she don't, then just some crazy as hell going on in my mind. I'm the crazy one in this situation. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
At night, the family has a sit-down meal, and then afterwards they play some games together, and then everybody goes upstairs and goes to sleep. But after everyone had gone to sleep, Mitch was just laying in bed thinking about this lamp. And so finally, he snuck out of his bed and went downstairs to the TV room, and he sat on the couch, and he just stared at this lamp. And for hours and hours, he just fixated himself on this lamp, watching it kind of morph around and turn upside down and get blurrier and blurrier by the second. The next day, Kayla found Mitch lying on the couch, passed out, and she asked him if he was okay. And again, Mitch didn't tell her about this lamp that was still blurry. He just told her that he wasn't feeling well and he was not going to go to work that day. But Mitch didn't go to work for 3 more days. He just sat on the couch and stared at this lamp. And Kayla obviously picked up on this strange behavior and kept poking and prodding to get more information about what was going on, but Mitch never told her the truth about this lamp. He just kept telling her he felt sick. She urged him to go see a doctor, but Mitch told her it would be fine, he'd get better. And then over time, as this lamp continued to morph and get bigger and get stranger and stranger, Mitch suddenly was unable to respond to his wife. He became totally unresponsive. And so obviously his wife became desperate and called the doctor. And as she's on the phone with the doctor trying to get advice about what to do, Mitch realizes the lamp is now growing in leaps and bounds. And before long, the lamp is the entire size of the room, and all he can see is the red color of this lamp. And then Mitch starts to hear these voices, these screams coming from somewhere in the distance. And then he feels this blinding pain in his head. And then he opens his eyes and he looks up and he sees he's laying on the sidewalk next to one of the buildings at his college in Louisiana. And surrounding him is this crowd of people with wide eyes that are staring at him. Mitch had no idea what was going on, and so he naturally just began scanning the crowd, looking for Kayla and his kids to try to figure out, how he got here. But before he could ask any questions and before he could find his wife and kids, a police officer ran through the crowd, picked him up and ran him over to his police car, put him in the back, and then began driving away. And so while Mitch is in the back of this police car, he turns to the officer and he says, "What's going on?" And the officer would tell him he was attacked by a huge college football player. He got hit in the head and he fell backwards and he hit his head again and he fell unconscious. Mitch asked the officer where his wife and kids were, and the cop said he had no idea. And that's when it clicked for Mitch. The lamp wasn't real. Neither was his wife, neither was his daughter, neither was his son, neither was his life. For the past 10 years, it was all a hallucination while he was unconscious after getting attacked. Mitch was brought to the hospital where he would make a full physical recovery, but after being released, he was horribly depressed, and he had to get intense therapy to basically grieve for the loss of his family that never existed. These days, Mitch says he can barely remember what his family even looked like, but periodically in his dreams, he will catch a glimpse of his son in his peripheral vision, and his son is perpetually 5 years old and he's trying to talk to his father, but Mitch can never understand what he says.
That is wild, Bean Team. This man literally was knocked out and he was hallucinating or dreaming or whatever the correct terminology is about a freaking family that never existed. But it was so real to him in that moment. You know what I'm saying? Why he was knocked out. Now, I can go down a long rabbit hole about something that happened to me back when I was in junior high. And I wasn't knocked out. I didn't get knocked out by nobody before y'all think somebody knocked my damn block off. No, I didn't get knocked out. But it was some stupid-ish that we used to do as stupid teenagers do, where you kind of like let somebody choke you or hold some part of your body until you literally fall out. I don't know why we used to play stupid games like that, but all I can say, while I was knocked out for those couple of seconds, I'm not going to even go into what it was, man, but it was different, but it felt so real at the same time. I'm just going to leave that alone and say that this was freaking crazy. I didn't see this coming at all. I thought he was gone crazy, but I didn't think he was hallucinating his whole family and ish, because MrBallen made it seem so real. I digress. Let's go to the next one. Goosebumps.
In 2006, a 20-year-old woman named Sarah started having some very strange dreams about a woman named Aurora. She had a very striking face with sharp features and long black hair. Now, her dreams varied. Sometimes Sarah was in a crowd of people, or she was at her office, or she was just alone in a room. But in all of her dreams, Aurora would always show up. Either she would interact with Aurora and they would speak, but Sarah could never remember what they actually spoke about, or Aurora would just be in the crowd or in the background just watching Sarah. Now, she had these dreams enough that eventually Sarah began to think, I must know someone named Aurora. I must have come across this person, and now they're just kind of manifesting in my brain at night when I'm sleeping. And so she began going through her older posts on social media to look in pictures of her and of her friends to see if there was a woman with striking features and long black hair that was this Aurora person in her dream. But after looking through hundreds and hundreds of pictures, she couldn't find any indication that she had met this person, at least not according to her social media. And so Sarah began just going on Google and typing in Aurora, long black hair, striking features. Has anybody dreamed about this? To see if there were people talking about having this type of dream on the internet. But she had no luck. Eventually,
I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that even though MrBallen is saying she can't find no evidence of Aurora being real, I think when we get to the end of this one, Aurora's gonna be freaking real. I don't know in what capacity, but I think she does exist. Y'all remember, y'all know cause it been that damn commercial been going on since I was a little child. The M&M commercial, with the yellow M&M and the red M&M and Santa Claus, and then they be like, he does exist, and then the Santa Claus be like, I do exist, and fall out like you didn't think Santa Claus existed until Santa Claus realized himself he existed. I don't know, man. I know I just went on a crazy tangent, but I bet some of y'all know what I'm talking about.
Eventually, after about 3 or 4 months of having these strange dreams that Aurora was in, Aurora stopped showing up in Sarah's dreams. It was like it suddenly was all over. And so very quickly, Sarah just kind of forgot about it. A few years later, on Halloween night 2009, Sarah and a friend pulled off the highway into a gas station. They had been out with some friends celebrating Halloween, and now they were making their way back home. Sarah pulled into an empty spot right in front of the convenience store, and after they were parked, Sarah and her friend got out, they went inside, they got some snacks and drinks, and then they came back outside and climbed back into Sarah's car. A few moments later, Sarah had turned her car on, she had backed out, and she had driven past all of the gas station pumps, and she was making her way towards the single-lane strip of road that merged out onto the highway. It was how anybody who got into this gas station got back out onto the highway. And so as she's getting closer to the entrance of this short merge road, her phone suddenly rings. What happens next occurred over a span of just a few seconds, so it might seem like this is over several minutes, but this all happened pretty much simultaneously. So she's pulling up to the entrance of this merge road. Her cell phone rings, and because there was no one behind her, it was not a busy night, Sarah decides to just stop her car, put it in park so she can safely take this phone call. And so she stops her car pretty much right in front of the entrance to this merge road, and she picks up her phone, she looks at the number, and she doesn't recognize it, but she picks it up anyways, and she says, "Hello." There was silence on her phone, and as Sarah is saying, "Hello, is anybody there?" another car from the gas station pulls up right behind Sarah's car, and they start honking their horn immediately. They're in a huge rush. And so Sarah, who's totally embarrassed that she's blocking traffic, she hangs up the phone, she puts it down, she puts her car back in drive, and she hits the gas. But this driver behind her is apparently in such a rush, they're so impatient, that they actually swerved around her, driving on the dirt off to the side of the road just to get around her, and then they sped off down the merge road back onto the highway. And literally, seconds later, another car that was already on the highway, a silver Honda Civic, lost control and smashed into this car that had just passed Sarah's car. So there's this huge car accident literally right in front of Sarah and her friend, who have now stopped the car. They're right at the end of the merge road looking at this horrible accident that they narrowly escaped. Sarah put her car back in park, she picked up her phone, and she called the police. When the police showed up a few moments later, they took down Sarah and her friend's version of events, and then a little while later, after the ambulances had left and after the two cars had been pulled off of the highway, one of the police officers pulled Sarah aside and told her that the driver of the Honda Civic and the driver of the car that had swerved around her had both been killed in the accident.
Damn, man. That's sad that they both passed away. But I'm just gonna go and throw this out here. I believe MrBallen finna say one of these victims was Aurora, or some Aurora finna pop up, man. I can feel it. I may be wrong, but I feel like that's where we going.
The only thing Sarah could think to do was to call back that number she didn't recognize that had effectively stopped her from getting onto the highway and maybe even stopped her from being hit by that Honda Civic. And so she wanted to talk to this person and thank them for saving her life. But when she called the number back, the person did not pick up. However, it went to her voicemail, and it said, "Hi, you've reached Aurora. Leave your name and number after the beep." Sarah could not believe it. She said she had never felt goosebumps like that in her entire life. The next day, Sarah tried calling the number again, and this time the woman, Aurora, answered the phone. The two got to talking, and Sarah explained her crazy dreams and now this crazy car crash thing and how it's all connected. And Aurora would tell Sarah, like, "That's amazing. This is a crazy story you're telling me, except I didn't call you last night. I have no idea how you got my phone number." And so at the end of this phone call, the two women really had not reached any sort of explanation for how this came to be, how they came to be talking. But they ultimately just said, "Okay, hey, thanks and best of luck to you." And then they hung up. After the call was over, Sarah found herself just kind of sitting there, not really sure how to react to what had just happened. It was such a totally bizarre thing that she had just been through over the past 24 hours. And then if you include the dream, this has been a multi-year long thing. And so on a whim, Sarah just opens up her Facebook account and she plugs in Aurora's full name, because Aurora had given her her full name on this phone call they had just had. And when she looked at her phone, when the results came in, Sarah nearly fainted. Right at the top of the results page was this woman, Aurora's Facebook account, and her profile picture showed her face. And when Sarah looked at her face, it was the exact same face she had seen so many times in her dreams. It was the same Aurora with the striking features and long black hair. The woman in her dreams was the woman who called her and saved her life.
But how in the freak did she call him, MrBallen? Aurora said she never called her that night. This is one of those ones that have my head hurting. Like, seriously, at the end, you can't even fathom, like, you can't even come up with a theory or explanation. Because Aurora said, "Yeah, that's amazing what happened. I'm glad you're still alive, but I'm not the one that called you." But that was the number that Sarah... Okay. Well, that theory wouldn't even make sense. I was about to say, long story short, story long, maybe Aurora called her on accident, but even if she called on accident, wouldn't she be able to just go look in her call log and be like, some kind of way dial your number. I don't freaking know, man. But I told y'all Aurora was gonna be a real person. I was kind of wrong as far as like she was a victim of in this accident. But wow, that's some guardian angel type ish on Earth. I don't freaking know, like a real human guardian angel without even trying to be a guardian angel, because Aurora said she didn't call her. Let's go to the next one. 16 minutes.
In 2006, 73-year-old Sherman Sizemore was the definition of a man's man. He had spent the bulk of his adult life doing one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, mining for coal in West Virginia. And while he was a coal miner, he apparently had lost track of the amount of times he had nearly been killed from mine shaft collapse and gas leaks. Later on in life, after his kids had all grown up, he had retired from coal mining and become an ordained Baptist minister. And despite his harrowing backstory and burly, intimidating appearance, he was known to be incredibly gentle and very calming to his parishioners. He was also known to be an incredibly devoted grandfather, to the point where if there was a chance to spend time with his grandkids, he would basically throw all of his responsibilities out the window to do that. But in January of that year, something changed in Sherman. He went from being this pillar in the community to being a deranged, paranoid lunatic. It all started on the afternoon of January 19th. Sherman and his wife Ruby were sitting in their home alone on the couch, just kind of doing their own things, when suddenly, out of the blue, Sherman just starts screaming as if he sees something in front of him that's terrifying him, and his scream startled Ruby so that she started screaming, and so she looks at her husband, and he's still just looking straight out ahead. He's terrified of something in front of him, and so Ruby looks from him to where he's looking, and there's nothing there. And so she turns back to her husband and she's like, "What's going on? What are you screaming for? What are you so scared of?" But Sherman wasn't able to speak. After he stopped screaming, he just continued to look straight out as if whatever had terrified him had him in this trance where he couldn't look away. And so his eyes are wide, his mouth is open, his face is going white, he's starting to sweat, and Ruby's starting to panic. She has no idea what's happening with him. And so eventually she just holds on to him and says, "Come back to me, come back to me." And Sherman at some point he kind of broke out of his trance. And he looked at his wife and he just says, "You can't leave me or they'll kill me." Ruby has never seen behavior like this in her husband ever. This is a completely different person she's interacting with. And so she has no idea what to do. And so instead, she just kind of holds on to Sherman and prays that he doesn't start acting like that again. But that didn't.
Sherman then lost his damn mind. Long story short, short story long.
Didn't happen. All day long, periodically, he would just start screaming about something that Ruby couldn't see. Now, Ruby did consider calling 911 and getting medics out there, but his behavior was so unusual, and he was normally such a rock who was so competent, who was so healthy, that she didn't want to. She felt like he would just kind of get through this, that if they can just get through today and get into tomorrow, that he would be better. And so she just all day was comforting him and just dealing with these episodes. And then finally they got into bed that night, and Ruby's thinking, "Thank goodness we're going to wake up tomorrow and things will be better." But when she woke up the next morning, it was very obvious Sherman had not slept at all. He was looking straight up at the ceiling. He looked worse than the day before. It was obvious that he was not back to normal. And so Ruby called the rest of the family and had them come over to figure out what they were going to do. But when Sherman found out his family was coming to his house, he told Ruby they can't come inside. He was afraid they and others were conspiring to bury him alive. The only person he could be around was Ruby, and his whole family had no idea what to do. Little did they know there was actually a very specific reason he was acting the way he was.
And I can't even come up with a reason, y'all. I have no idea why he acting the way he was. But I will say this real quick. That first picture of Sherman, the real picture that MrBallen showed at the beginning of this, I remember that picture. So that means that I have heard this story before, but I just don't remember it. You know what I'm saying, man? We have watched so many of these over here, so many MrBallen, so many of all the other true crime, horror, dark, deep, and mysterious, what is going on content creators that we watch. Till even the first two, I don't remember them, but I probably have watched them before, but it's almost like it's brand new to me. What the hell is wrong with Sherman?
few months before January 19th, which was the day Sherman turned into this different person, a few months earlier, he began complaining of severe abdominal pains. And so he and his wife Ruby and his daughter, they went to the hospital, and the doctor, after examining him and running some tests, determined that most likely his pain was coming from his gallbladder. But the only way to be sure would be to do some exploratory surgery and literally look inside of Sherman's gut and look at his gallbladder and see if that was the problem. And so the doctor asked Sherman, are you prepared to do an exploratory surgery, or would you like to just kind of wait it out and see what happens with this pain? And so Sherman talked it over with his wife and his family, and they made the decision that the pain was just too much, and so they would go forward with the surgery. And so on the morning of January 19th, so again, this is the day that Sherman basically loses his mind, he goes into the hospital completely normal. He goes in with his wife, he goes in with his daughter, and he makes his way over to the surgery wing of the hospital. He says bye to his family, and he's put on a stretcher bed, and he's wheeled in and prepped for surgery, and then brought into the operating room. And while he was in the operating room, laying on his stretcher bed, flat on his back, looking straight up at all these bright lights above him, he just struck up some chit-chat with the nurses and doctors who were in the room, prepping the room for surgery, and they were also putting the IV into his arm. Then at some point, one of the nurses lowered the oxygen mask onto Sherman's face so the anesthesiologist could administer the 2-drug cocktail that would knock him out for the surgery. Sherman was scheduled to get something known as general anesthesia for this operation, where basically he would be completely out, he wouldn't feel anything, they'd do the surgery, and then he would wake up in recovery. And so once this mask was on Sherman's face, the anesthesiologist began pumping him full of the drugs that would make him be knocked out for the surgery. However, the anesthesiologist only administered one of the 2 drugs necessary for general anesthesia. He administered the paralyzing drug, but he did not administer the actual anesthetic that would knock him out, and most importantly, would get rid of all of his pain. And so as this mask is on his face and Sherman believes he's being given the proper dosage of drugs, the nurse who was nearby told Sherman to go ahead and start counting backwards in his head from 10, knowing full well that Sherman would pass out before he reached 0. And Sherman knew this too. He had been in surgery before, and so he happily began counting in his head. 10, 9, 8, he started to feel something. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom, he was out. Except he wasn't. When he reached 0 in his head, counting down, he realized he had not passed out. He began taking mental stock of what was going on, and he realized he could completely feel his body. But when he tried to move his body, he couldn't. He was completely paralyzed. When he tried to make a sound, he couldn't, because his vocal cords were also paralyzed. The only thing he could move were his eyes. He could move them left and right. However, they had taped his eyes shut, so he can't see anything.
God.
And so Sherman is thinking to himself, okay, I've been given the drugs, maybe they're slow acting, any minute now I'm going to drift off to sleep and this will just be a distant memory. But after a few seconds, he's hearing the doctors and nurses in the room. He can't see them, but he hears them. They seem to be moving towards doing this operation, and he's still awake. And so Sherman becomes frantic and starts flicking his eyes left and right as fast as he possibly can, and the rapid eye movement actually loosened the tape on both of his eyelids, and it created a tiny slit that he could actually look through. And what he saw terrified him. The surgeon was walking over next to him. He was getting his gloves on, and then the surgeon says, "Scalpel." And the nurse hands him this chrome metallic blade, and the surgeon takes the blade and begins cutting into Sherman's midsection. Sherman felt everything, but Sherman couldn't do anything about it. All he could do was rapidly flick his eyes left and right in hopes one of them would see that he was awake, that he was feeling this. But no one was paying attention to his face, so they didn't see his eyes moving around. And so the surgeon continued to cut into his midsection until he had cut out a fairly significantly sized hole, at which point the surgeon hands the scalpel to the nurse and says, "Clamps," at which point the nurse hands him what looks like a torture device, and the surgeon proceeds to use these clamps to pin segments of Sherman's skin that has just been cut open to his body to basically keep the hole open. And then the surgeon began tugging on the outsides of this hole in Sherman's midsection, making sure it was big enough that he could actually get a good look into his body. And every little tug is sending lightning bolts of pain into Sherman's body. But again, all he can do is flick his eyes left and right, and no one's paying attention.
Man, I probably would have been passed out, y'all. Like, I would have, I wouldn't have need no medicine no more. I probably would have been freaking had a heart attack or a stroke or something, man. This what is happening to this dude. This man is literally conscious. Watching himself, his body, get cut open and having surgery on. Oh, my God.
The surgeon called out for, and the nurse handed him a camera that he jammed into Sherman's gut. And then the surgeon said, suction, and the nurse got what looked like a vacuum and pressed it inside of this open wound and began sucking out fluids from his body. The pain Sherman was experiencing is unimaginable. Every second felt like an eternity. Forceps, the surgeon called, and the nurse handed him these metal prongs that he put inside of this hole in Sherman's body, and he used them to dislodge his gallbladder so he could get a better look at it. By this point, Sherman wanted to die. He was no longer flicking his eyes left and right. He was just looking straight out, hoping someone would finally see him. And someone did. One of the nurses standing next to the surgeon looked up at Sherman's face and saw Sherman looking back, terrified at the nurse. At which point the nurse yelled out, "Stop, he's awake, he's awake!" And the surgeon practically faints, and he looks over at the anesthesiologist and he calls him, "Get over here and fix this." And so the anesthesiologist comes running over from the side of the room. He gets up next to Sherman and begins pumping him full of painkillers. And as he's doing this, he has this moment of clarity. He remembers he didn't give him the anesthetic. And so as these new painkillers that have just been introduced begin to take their effect, Sherman's eyes go from being terrified to glazed over, and he does pass off to sleep. And so now he's out and he can't feel anything. But now the anesthesiologist and the medical team realize they have a very big problem. This patient just experienced 16 minutes of surgery and felt all of it. And at the end of it, when he wakes up, he's going to remember it, and he's probably going to file a lawsuit against the hospital. And so,
hell yeah, I'm gonna file a goddamn lawsuit against y'all motherfucking ass. And that anesthesiologist, your ass need to be fired. That you can't make no mistake like that. And I feel like I heard this story before, y'all. But it's just great to hear it again coming from MrBallen, because it do feel brand new. But yeah, man, a lawsuit. Oh, I'm gonna need some millions up out y'all. I'm gonna try to make it go bankrupt. This whole hospital. Let's go.
a decision was made. It's unclear if the anesthesiologist acted alone or if the entire team was in on this, but regardless, the anesthesiologist administered an additional drug after giving all these painkillers. This additional drug was called midazolam, but it's better known as the amnesia drug. And like its nickname implies, anyone who gets it will forget what has just happened to them. And so the idea was, by giving him this amnesia drug, he won't remember the trauma he had suffered through during the surgery, and so wouldn't file a lawsuit. And so
now that's just fucked up.
After he was given this drug, the medical team, they went back to doing the surgery, they completed it, and they got him back out to recovery. And then when Sherman woke up in recovery, he did not remember what had happened to him inside of the operating room, at least not consciously. Those horrible 16 minutes had been implanted on Sherman's subconscious. Basically, his body recognized that he had experienced extreme trauma. However, the amnesia drug wiped away the memory of how he received that trauma. So there's this big disconnect in his memory. And so when Sherman came to in the recovery room, he immediately sensed something was horribly, horribly wrong. He was scared, he was anxious, he had this incredible sense of dread, but he had no memory to tie these feelings to. And so as Sherman is sitting in recovery, he must have tried to kind of hide the way he was feeling because he didn't even remotely understand it. He had been completely happy and normal going into the surgery, and now a couple of hours later, he's a complete mess. And so he leaves the hospital that day on January 19th. He goes back to his house and he sits on the couch with his wife. And as he's sitting there, suddenly these horrible feelings he's having, they become too much. And he basically has a panic attack and he starts screaming out and he's terrified of something, but he doesn't know what it is. And then over the next couple of days, he began having these flashbacks where he would access the actual 16 minutes of torture he went through. But when he would see someone cutting into him and opening his chest up and sucking things out of it, he didn't think
that happened to me and that's why I feel this way. Instead, he thought it was just this horrible nightmare that he couldn't escape from. And so his family did eventually start getting doctors and psychologists and all these people involved to figure out what was wrong with him. But before they could figure it out, the whole situation had just become too terrible for Sherman. And so on February 2nd, just 2 weeks after he came out of that surgery, he would take his own life.
Oh
His
my
family was
God.
unbelievably heartbroken. It didn't seem real that this had happened. And so they would continue to dig and figure out what went wrong. And they would finally get their hands on the medical report from the gallbladder exploratory surgery on January 19th. And after giving it to another doctor to look over, this doctor discovered that Sherman had in fact experienced 16 minutes of something known as anesthesia awareness, where you are awake or feel a portion of your surgery. And shockingly, this happens to 20,000 people a year. However,
Whoa.
Sherman's case, forgetting the amnesia drug, just literally what he went through, 16 full minutes of this really intensive surgery that he felt, that is an absolute rarity. That does not happen very often. Sherman's family would go on to sue the hospital, and they would be awarded an undisclosed amount of money from the hospital in 2008.
Man, that is freaking crazy, y'all. And I really do remember this picture, but I really don't remember the story, man. But Jesus freaking Christ, like I said, man, that's effed up what they did by giving him the amnesia drug to try to cover up for they fuck up. And look what it led to. That man going crazy and taking his life. Man, now I feel like that damn whole hospital need to be fired, or at least everybody involved in that surgery, because even if it wasn't your idea to give them the amnesia drug, if you knew that it was being administered, you need to be fired too. Damn, man. Rest in peace, Sherman. The Woman in Black.
In October of 2005, a 21-year-old named Nathan was back home in Elk Grove, California, visiting his mother at her apartment for a couple of days. Her apartment was part of this really safe complex. It was gated. There's lots of lights and cameras. So anything that went bump in the night was just going to be, your noisy neighbors or something. On the last night of Nathan's stay, he was laying in his bed in the guest room, listening to the hum of the street lamp that was outside and the crickets and the passing by of cars, when he drifted off to sleep. At about 2 a.m., Nathan woke up, or so he thought. He couldn't move his body, he could only move his eyes, and even though he had never experienced sleep paralysis before, he instinctively understood this is probably that. He noticed the room was completely silent. There was no more crickets, no more hum of the light outside, no more traffic, just total silence. And then he started flashing his eyes around the room because he couldn't move his head or his body, and he started taking stock of the room. The bed he was in was positioned as far away from the door as he could in the back right corner. From where he was laying, if he looked to his right, in that corner was this big armoire, and then moving left from the armoire as he scanned the room, you'd come to the door, which is on the opposite side of where his bed was, and then if he kept scanning left, he would reach the foot of his bed, and just beyond the foot of his bed was a table and a chair. But because he was laying flat, he couldn't really look down and actually see the table and chair. And so with all of his strength, he managed to raise his head just enough that he had a line of sight to that section of his room, the only section he has not looked at yet. And he sees the table and chair, and he sees in the corner is this dark figure that's standing there looking at him. He's completely frozen with fear. His thought is, there's an intruder in the house. How did they get in here? What are they doing in here? And he managed to keep his head up just long enough to get a decent look at this dark figure, and he determined it was most likely a woman with a shawl covering her face. And before his head fell back to the pillow, he saw her suddenly crouch down on the ground out of view. And then Nathan's head fell back, and now he knows there's just some stranger in his room, and he can't lift his head up anymore, and he's looking around with his eyes. He sees the armoire, he sees the door, he can't see that table and chair, and then he hears the sound of someone slithering along the ground out of view, and he can hear her breathing as she's getting closer and closer to the edge of the bed. And he's laying there terrified. He's so scared he can't even make a sound, and he's telling himself this has to be a dream. Wake up, wake up, wake up. And he's laying there, and this woman, she stands up and she leans out over his bed, and she looks at him, and her face is pale and her eyes are sunk way back in her head. And then she begins to slowly crawl on top of him, and Nathan's sitting here looking at this woman. He wants to close his eyes, but he can't. Then he just feels his chest being pressed down.
He can hear the sounds of the springs compressing all around him as this woman positions herself on his chest. And then he finally manages to let out a scream, and then suddenly he's awake. The woman's gone. And he sits up and he's looking around. There's nobody in his room. The familiar hum of the light and the crickets and the traffic outside, they all return. And his mom comes running in the room and she's like, "Hey, are you okay? I heard screaming in here." And he said, "Oh, no, I had a bad dream. I'm fine now. I had a terrible dream, but I'm fine now."
Man, y'all, I gotta tell y'all some real ish. I know somebody who have experienced this sleep paralysis or whatever the word, the terminology that MrBallen used. But what my mama called it was the witch riding your back or the rich riding you or something. And long story short story long, and I hope that she don't get mad at me for even telling this story, but one of my sisters have experienced this, and she literally said she couldn't move and she seen a witch. She called it a witch, but it was a woman, and all she could do was just sit right there and watch this woman come, and then the woman left and she was able to move again. Long story short story long. Now I know I'm leaving out details because I was a little child when it happened. But when she told my mama said it was the witch riding her back or something like that. This is something that's real, y'all. I believe that. Let's go.
And his mom's like, "Okay, all right, you need anything?" And he's like, "Nope." So she comes over, she gives him a hug and a kiss. She goes back to bed, and he would go downstairs, flip on a Disney movie, actually Aladdin, and he would fall asleep with a Disney movie on and with lights on. And there was no more sleep paralysis that night. The next day, Nathan got up and he headed back to his house, and he couldn't shake the experience. He had never had sleep paralysis before, but it was just so much more terrifying than he ever would have imagined. And he's just thinking to himself, I can't believe there are people that put up with this on any sort of regular basis. But, after a couple of days and getting home and not experiencing any sleep paralysis, time went on and he just kind of forgot about it. A few months later, in March of 2006, Nathan is at this big family party in Chico, California, big outdoor barbecue, all of his family's there, and at some point his sister shows up. His sister was not supposed to be attending this party, so it was a great surprise. He hasn't seen her in a while, and he immediately pulls her aside to catch up with her. And so for the first hour of their conversation, they're just chatting about their lives and what they're up to. Towards the end of their conversation, Nathan suddenly felt compelled to share his sleep paralysis experience with his sister. And the reason he wanted to was because he knew that she knew that he was actually a skeptic. And so she would believe him. If he's telling her this is what happened, she would believe that that's what he saw. And so he starts by—
And I can remember this story too now, y'all. I can most definitely remember this one. But the crazy part is that I don't remember the plot twist at the end. Like, I don't understand. I don't remember how it's going to exactly end. Like, I don't know where we going. So it's going to shock me all the same.
By saying, I had the weirdest experience at Mom's apartment just a couple of months ago. I'm pretty sure it was sleep paralysis. And his sister immediately butts in and she goes, "Wait a minute. I had sleep paralysis for the first time in my life 2 weeks ago at Mom's apartment. It was horrible. I was in the guest room and then I saw this woman and she was like standing on me. I thought I was gonna die. It was horrible." That's exactly what happened to me. I was laying in the guest room and I couldn't move, and then I saw a woman in the corner and she stood on my chest. They proceeded to go over all the details of each of their stories, and they discovered that they had had almost the exact same experience. And at the end of it, they wanted to have a rational explanation for how they both could just somehow have their only sleep paralysis experience in the same room in roughly the same timeline and experience the exact same events. They were trying to, come up with a rational explanation for that, but it was just too much of a coincidence. But ultimately, neither of them were really prepared to start discussing what else it could be. So they decided to just kind of laugh it off and say, "Man, that's pretty weird," and they moved on. After the party was over, Nathan would go back to his house and he would tell his wife about this crazy coincidence he and his sister had, and his wife would say, "Yeah, that's wild." But after that, Nathan just did not want to think about it or talk about it, and so he kind of just, pushed it out of his mental space and did forget about it. He moved on. 5 months later, in August of 2006, Nathan's mom would move out of that apartment building and she would move into a 2-story house still in Elk Grove, California. Shortly after she moved in, she asked Nathan if he would come spend a couple nights with her, and Nathan said sure. In order to better understand what happens to Nathan over the course of his stay at his mother's new house, you need to understand a basic layout of her house. So when you walk through her double doors, To your left is going to be a formal living room. In the center of the house is a hallway that shoots straight back to the kitchen. And then to your right when you walk in, there's a wall, and on that wall is the stairs leading up to the second floor. If you take those stairs to the second floor, you reach a landing where there's a window that looks back into the backyard, and immediately to your right, there is a single door, and that's the master bedroom where Nathan's mom would sleep. From the landing, if you turned left, there'd be another door that's a mirror image of the master bedroom door, and this door is the guest room. That's where Nathan was gonna stay. And then to the left of the guest room was a hall that went to the front of the house, but that's irrelevant to the story. If you went inside the guest room, the bed was located in the back right corner, so the same layout as the guest room in the apartment building, where the person laying in the bed, so Nathan, his feet would be closest to the door. And from Nathan's perspective in the bed, the only other piece of furniture in this new house guest room was a table that was, from his perspective, on the right-hand wall, centered on the wall, and on the table was a TV. So that's the only things in the room. The first night Nathan was at this new house was totally uneventful. The second night, not so much. He was up in the guest room, laying on the bed, watching TV. The lights are off, it's just the TV on, and at some point, he dozes off. He wakes up a short time later, and he can't move. It's the same sensation he had when he was staying with his mom at her apartment. And he begins to panic because the last time he felt this way, a strange veiled woman stood on his chest and made it feel like he was dying. And so immediately, he's trying to move his body, he can't, and so using his eyes, he starts looking around the room, praying this woman is not in the room with him. And so he looks to the right, to that corner, which he can see. There's no one there. From this corner, he starts scanning across the room. He sees the TV, it's still on. He keeps scanning and he sees the door and it's open. And he's able to just barely make out the space at the foot of the bed. He can actually see to the corner, and this woman, she's not in here. And so initially, he feels incredibly relieved that she's not in the room with him. But then he finds himself focusing on the open door into the dark hallway. And he's thinking to himself, please do not come walking through that door. And so he stares at the open door, just hoping he breaks out of the sleep paralysis, when he notices something about the TV. It's flickering. And so he averts his gaze to the TV, and he realizes what he's looking at on TV does not look familiar. It does not look like a TV show. It looks like CCTV camera footage, like it looks like a security camera footage. And he realizes the footage he's looking at is the inside of his mother's kitchen downstairs. He recognized the way it was laid out. That's his mother's house. That's downstairs. And he's staring at the footage thinking, why is this footage playing on the TV? And I don't think there's a camera down there. When he notices on the camera, the woman with the veil walks into the middle of the frame. And she looks up at the camera right as the camera turns off. And then the room is completely dark. There's no more ambient light in the room. The hallway is dark. And he's left paralyzed knowing this woman is downstairs in the kitchen.
And he can't do nothing about it, man. I just got a little chill over my body, man. Like, you see this woman on the TV down there, and you know damn well where she coming. Up here to me, and I can't do nothing about it. See, I feel like, man, he should have known something crazy like this was gonna happen. You talk to your sister about your sleep paralysis, and she said she had the same thing. I don't know if I can stay at mama's house. Mama will have to come stay with me. I don't know if I can visit mama. Now, I can't spend the night. I don't know about that. That's how I would have been talking about mama. I don't know about that, mama. I can't spend the night because I see some things on TV that gonna come up here. Man, let's go.
As he's laying there, he hears her start running through the house. And it sounds like an animal is barreling into things as she's running through the bottom floor, and she stops at the foot of the stairs. And he's thinking to himself, I know where she's going. She's coming up to my room. And so as he's laying there, he feels his heart racing and he's staring at the open door. He knows she's gonna come flying up those stairs and she's gonna come through that door. And instead of running up the stairs, he hears her take one step. Two-step. And as she's making her way up the stairs, he's just thinking, please break out of this trance, stop this paralysis, wake up, wake up. And then he sees her head emerge, and she turns to look at him from the stairs into the room. And once she sees it's him, she bolts around and starts charging into the room on all fours like an animal. At this point, Nathan lets out a primal scream. He is scared for his life as this woman is charging towards him, and she stops dead in her tracks right in the middle of the room. She looks at him, turns around, and crashes out of the room, charges downstairs, and then it's silent. As soon as she was downstairs, Nathan could sit up. Except it did not feel like the first time he had sleep paralysis at his mom's apartment, when he sat up and he had the sensation of relief. You've woken up. You were asleep before, now you're awake. This time, it was like He was always awake, but now he can sit up. He did not have a sense of relief. In fact, he was worried she was still in the house. And as he's sitting up in bed, his mother comes running into the room. She looks disheveled, she's half asleep, and she's like, was that you? Were you running around the house? I could have sworn I heard someone running around the house. Was that you? Nathan's looking at her and he can't even process what he's been through, whether that was real, whether it was a dream. And he's trying to find the words to describe to his mom the dream he had, but like he can't process what's happening. And he just says, Mom, we have to check the house. We have to make sure no one's in the house. And so the two of them flip on every light upstairs. They're not even talking. At this point, it's survival mode. They turn on all the lights upstairs, and Nathan leads the way down. And they're flicking on all the lights, and they manage to search the whole house, and there's no sign of a break-in. There's no one in their house. After the coast was clear and they felt like they were not in immediate danger, they went into the kitchen to kind of talk about what just happened. And so Nathan's like, okay, Mom, I just got to tell you everything that I'm thinking right now. I can't really process what just happened. I think it was a bad dream, but I'm starting to think that it could be something else, or I'm just losing my mind. So a few months ago, I was sleeping in your guest room in your apartment, and I had an experience that I'm almost positive was sleep paralysis. You know, I was laying there, I couldn't move, and this figure was in the room and they were standing on me. It was terrifying, but it sounded an awful lot like sleep paralysis. But then a couple months after that, I talked to my sister and I told her about it. And she told me that very recently, right before you moved into this house, actually, she was in that room and she also had basically the exact same experience. She had never had sleep paralysis before. I had never had sleep paralysis before. So we've basically had the exact same horrifying experience in the same room around the same time. And then just now, tonight, I had another sleep paralysis experience with the same woman who was running around the house, and you just said you heard her running around the house. His mom looked really concerned, but she wasn't shocked. She says to Nathan, I have seen this woman. I saw her in my apartment way long time ago, but I remember what you're describing. That's the experience I had. This woman, showed up in the room and she stood on me, and it scared the heck out of me, but I didn't tell anyone because I thought it was sleep paralysis. And so Nathan and his mom proceeded to spend the next several hours just talking through what this could be. How could they, all three of them, him, his mom, and his sister, how could all of them have had the exact same experience? And how could tonight, when Nathan had this experience, how could his mom have heard those footsteps if that was indeed sleep paralysis?
And that's the thing that make this real like freaking spooky. I got chills on me again thinking about that, man. The fact that his mama actually heard this witch running through the house, like sleep paralysis supposed to be like a terrible nightmare, so to speak. Long story short, story long. It don't supposed to be real. It don't really supposed to be somebody in the damn house. You know what I'm saying, man? And another thing that made this strange just compared to my experience with it, I got 5 sisters. I'm the youngest. I'm the brother. So it's 6 kids and my mama in the house. Nobody else had this, like my mama called it, witch riding your back experience, but that one sister that I'm talking about. So for all 3 of them to have this experience, that right there in itself is freaking crazy.
Because it wasn't Nathan, he was in the bedroom, and it wasn't his mom, she was in her bedroom, and she didn't have any pets, so who could it be? Nathan says he and his family are still totally rattled by this experience, and they don't have an answer. And this is a family of skeptics, so they're not looking for a reason to call this paranormal. They simply don't have the answers. Nathan has said that he, his mom, and his sister have not had any further experiences with the woman in black ever since that last experience Nathan had, and they're just hoping it stays that way.
That's crazy, man. Like, they had a unique experience with it. Like I said, just for all 3 of them, they experienced it. And then how in the hell did the mama actually hear him while he was experiencing sleep paralysis? It almost made me want to Google sleep paralysis and look it up and get a little more information on it, get a little more familiar with it. You know what I'm saying, man? Freaking crazy. I'm telling y'all, I got a couple of chills while we were listening to that one. And look at that lady right there. Let's go.
Hold on, we got one more very special story to cap off these 5 stories. It is special because this story is going to be included in our brand new graphic novel coming out October 1st. And I actually told this story live recently on a YouTube live stream. And so if you missed that live telling, don't worry, because we pulled that story out of the live stream. We completely edited it. And now you all get to listen to it right here, right now. Enjoy.
And I was looking at MrBallen live stream. I think that was last Sunday he did this live stream, but I didn't hear this story, y'all. I didn't check the story out. Or it was 2 weeks ago. Tomato. But I didn't actually hear this story. So this is going to be my first time experiencing this one. Let's go. Thorns.
In July of 2012, there was a woman named Simone who was 22 years old, who was living in this beautiful town in southwestern Germany called Rüdesham am Rhein. And it's this winemaking village, and it's gorgeous. There's rolling green hills, there's vineyards as far as the eye can see. It's situated right on the Rhine River. It's like this wonderful place. And Simone had grown up in this village. That's where she lived, and she loved it there. Charmed childhood. You know, she's 22 now. But this summer she was feeling a little bit down because she was actually getting ready to leave this village and start the next chapter of her life in New York City. But instead of dwelling on, this, sadness of moving away from home for the first time, she instead was really fixated on what she was going to do that summer, her final summer in Rüdesham am Rhein. And so, Simone, one of her favorite memories of her entire life in this village is in the summer, she would go to the summer camp. There was this beautiful little camp in this forest that was not far from the town. And from the time she was a little kid, she went as an attendee to this camp. There's all these counselors, and there's 200 kids that go to it, and they play games, and there's, they put on stage plays. And it's just this wonderful, wholesome camping experience. And when she became a teenager, she basically was too old to go to this camp. And so she did what many of the other former attendees did, which is they eventually transitioned to becoming a counselor, like a volunteer counselor. And so she became a counselor and, loved it, frankly, more than being an attendee. And for every summer after that, she was a volunteer counselor. And this summer, July of 2012, was no different. And she was going to be a counselor as well. So that was what she was going to do with her final summer before leaving for New York City. So in mid-July of that year, Simone packs up her stuff and she heads off to this forest to go be a camp counselor. And so the logistics of this camp is the attendees, the children. It's a 2-week-long camp, 200 kids. They would get dropped off by their parents in the morning, and then in the evening, they'd get picked up and go back home. But for the counselors, they would actually live at the campsite for the 2 weeks. It was like a 2-week time. They were out in the woods together. And, the counselors had kind of created that tradition, if you will. And they told, the staff, if you will, that the reason they were doing that is for efficiency's sake. We got to, we'll be there first thing in the morning because we're living there and we can set the camp up. And, when the kids go home for the day, we're all going to be there anyways. So it's easier to clean up the camp. There's all these reasons they had for it. But the truth was, the reason the counselors liked to stay at this camp and live there is because after the kids would go home at night, all the counselors would retreat to their tents, which they stayed in for these 2 weeks. They put these tents out in the forest. So the camp is like in a clearing, and then basically just into the tree line, they would set up their tents. And the counselors would live out there for the 2 weeks. But once the kids were gone, they would just go out to their little campsite and put a little campfire together. And the drinking age was 16 years old, or it is 16 years old in Germany. And so they just like party, basically. Not like crazy, but they had like a good time out in the woods.
Yeah.
So that was the real allure of the counselor side of being at this camp.
So that's like they went from being children of the camp, enjoying the camp, to enjoying the camp on a whole nother level. Now we can be adults at the camp when the little children go home. You know what I'm saying? And MrBallen didn't say they got a little crazy, but they did do a little turning up, little alcohol, maybe a little smoking. Man, I can understand. Like that probably was their more favorite time is when the little kids go home. So now we can do what we like to do. I get it.
So Simone mid-July, she heads out to the camp. She gets there a day ahead of when camp starts, and she connects with all of the counselors she hadn't seen for so long, and they set up the camp. And then that night, they did not go out into the woods and have a party. They just set up their tents out in the tree line. And then the next day is day one of the actual camp, and the kids come along. They get dropped off by their parents, and they have this wonderful first day of camp, you know, doing their thing, doing camp stuff. And then in the evening, after the kids all left, Simone and the other, dozen or so counselors, after doing all their chores to wrap up for the day, they excitedly grabbed, their beer and wine and rushed out to the tents in the forest to have their first kind of like party night. And so they get out to the tents, and they're all, having a good time, swapping stories, just enjoying summer. And in virtue of it being the first day, a lot of the counselors were pretty exhausted. It was a full effort that first day. And so no one was really up for staying up super late. They wanted to crash and just go to bed. Simone kind of wanted to stay awake. And so she was one of the last people to finally retire into her tent. But she did eventually. It's well past midnight. You got to picture where this is happening too. They're far enough away from the actual campground. They're like well into the tree line that there's no light beyond whatever they have on them. So, if you sleep in these woods, it's like darkness, right? So it's well past midnight. Simone finally is like one of the last people to climb into her tent, and they all slept on these cots that they would put inside of their tent. So they're elevated off the ground. And so Simone gets into her tent, and she gets on her cot, and it's just so hot. It was just really hot this time of the year, and she just felt like it was stifling in her tent. And so she decided she would pull her cot out of her tent and just basically set it just in the woods. Like, imagine if you wandered off into the woods with a cot, put it down, and lied on top of it. That's what she was doing. She's in the middle of the forest, completely exposed, and she's going to try to sleep because it's a little bit cooler out there. She wasn't the only one doing this. Some of the other counselors had also struggled to fall asleep because of the heat. So there was at least a few other people that had their cots outside of their tent. And so
I have never went camping a day in my life. I'll tell y'all the truth on that. I have never went camping a day in my life, but this just sounds like a terrible idea. I'm not going to sleep outside, even though we are technically still outside. But damn, I at least need my tent as shelter. But I understand that it's hot and all that. And like I said, I don't know if this is normal for campers to do sometime, but I'll just have to deal with that heat, man. I need that tent around me at least.
Simone, she puts her cot next to or near another counselor who's already asleep. Simone gets in her cot, and she's trying to fall asleep, but she's still struggling to fall asleep. She could only really hear the sounds of the other counselors that were kind of snoring and, sleeping away, but she couldn't sleep. And she had this growing sense of dread as she was laying, again, in total darkness in the woods, exposed in this cot. I can imagine it being a little bit stressful. But eventually, she falls asleep. I'm going to show you an image that we were going to prep and put on the screen, but I'm going to show you literally in the book. Once she falls asleep, Simone is thrust into a visceral nightmare, one that she remembered every detail of this nightmare. So in her dream, okay, she comes to in her dream, and she looks out, and she sees this post-apocalyptic skyline. It's like a desert city with all these buildings that have now basically fallen into disrepair. They're crumbling over. It looks like, a nuclear bomb has gone off and we're in the nuclear holocaust, and humanity is being wiped out. And so she's looking off into the distance, and she sees this skyline of just broken down buildings, and it's just, sand everywhere. And between her and these buildings, so in the foreground, are all these people that are just standing there, shoulder to shoulder, maybe like a couple hundred feet away from her. Their clothes are in tatters. They look like some of them are naked, but they're just like barely wearing any of these clothes. And they're standing there, shoulder to shoulder, just staring at Simone. It's hard.
Man, I think I'm in The Walking Dead.
Hard to detail this and hold this, but there you go. That's the visual for the skyline. And so they're all staring at Simone. And so she instinctively is fearful of these people, but they're not moving towards her. They're not doing anything. They're just kind of standing there like zombies. And so she's kind of taking stock of the scene, and she didn't know why it was scary, but it was. She's like, this is a nightmare, right? As she's looking at these people and as she's taking in the skyline, she takes stock of the fact that on either side of her are these two huge men that she doesn't know how, or they're not physically laying hands on her, but she can tell they are the reason that she can't move from the spot she's in. She's kind of rooted to the spot. The guy on her left is not doing anything. He's just standing there. But the guy on her right is kind of turned to the side, like he's doing something with his hands, but you can't quite see what it is. And so, Simone, she's kind of looking over as best as she can at this guy, trying to figure out what he's doing. She's seeing these people and this horrible skyline. And then at some point, the guy on her right turns back around, and in his hand, he's holding what looks like a wreath, like a holiday wreath you would hang on your door, during Christmas time, let's say. And so Simone sees this wreath, doesn't really know what to make of it. It's this weird, nightmare she's having. But the guy, without saying anything, who's next to Simone, he raises the wreath over her head, right? He's holding it above her head. And at this point, the other guy on the left side of Simone, he grabs the other side of this wreath. So now there's 4 hands holding this wreath above Simone's head, okay? I don't know if I'm in frame, so I'm going to go straight on with the camera. So they're holding this wreath, and they begin to lower it towards Simone's head. And as they do, Simone can tell all these people, they're looking a little bit more intently in the direction of Simone, really taking into account what's going to happen here. And as soon as this wreath touches Simone's head, she feels this blinding pain, like an excruciating pain all around the crown of her head. And she realizes at this exact moment that this is not just some wreath, it's a crown of thorns. And the thorns are digging into her head, and these 2 huge men are pulling it down on her head as hard as they possibly can. And she wants to scream, but she can't make any noise. She wants to run, she can't. And so she's just stuck there feeling this excruciating pain, and blood is pouring down her face. And it's unreal. It feels real. It literally feels real to her.
And I think it is real, man. I think this lady is having a dream, but the dream is giving her signs of what's going on in real life. Long story short story long. Something going on with this lady head in real life. Something like that pain that MrBallen talking about is real. It's real, man. But she sleep, and she turning that pain. She making that pain go into her dream or her nightmare. This is a freaking nightmare. I don't know. Let's go.
And so in the dream, this goes on for several seconds until finally it's so much that she wakes up. She's out of the dream. And so Simone, she takes stock of the fact that she's in this dark forest, which must have been, disconcerting at first, but she looks around, she's in her cot, she's surrounded by the counselors, she can't really see anything, but she's like, oh, okay, it was just a bad dream. But instinctively, like we all do when we sometimes have maybe not dreams like this, I hope not, but similar horrible dreams, you kind of check just to make sure you really are not dreaming. And so she reached up and touched her head to make sure she was not, in fact, wearing a crown of thorns. And she touched her head, and there was no crown of thorns, and so she's relieved. But when she brought her hand back down, she can't see her hand, it's too dark, but she felt like there was something on it, something sticky. And at the same time, as she's noticing that there's something sticky on her head, she begins to feel this pain bubbling up around her head that was very similar to the pain she felt in her dream. And so as this pain is ratcheting up and up and up, she catches out of the corner of her eye, again, it's very dark, but maybe out of the moonlight or something, she could either hear something or barely see something running around in the tree line near her, kind of scurrying off away from her. She has no idea what it is, but she can't even focus on it because now the pain, the real pain, not the phantom pain in her dream, but the actual pain to her head is so blinding, she can only focus on that. And it finally gets to the point where she starts to panic. She doesn't know what's going on. She's realizing this is blood. That's what I touched my head. There's blood on my head. And so she begins to scream. So she's screaming, and the girl who's next to her, the other counselor, wakes up because the girl's screaming right next to her. The counselor sits up. She sees Simone screaming. She's like, what's going on? What's going on? She can't see Simone. It's too dark. And so this other counselor fumbles for a flashlight, grabs a flashlight, turns around, and shines it on Simone's face. And the second Simone is illuminated and this counselor can see her, the other counselor begins to scream at what she sees on Simone's head. And so for the next 15 minutes, it is absolute chaos in the forest as people are screaming. They're trying to figure out what's going on. The other counselors are waking up. Nobody knows what's going on. And in the course of those 15 minutes, the other counselors grab Simone. They put her into one of the vehicles they had at the camp. And by this point, Simone is vomiting. She's still bleeding from her head. And they rushed her to the hospital. I wish I could poll right now and say, what do you think happened?
But I'll tell you what happened. When Simone was having that dream, the dream where she sees the city skyline and she doesn't know what's going on, and then suddenly she felt the thorns being driven into her head. Well, the pain she was feeling in her dream of something driving into her head was synced up with actual pain she was feeling in real life. There was something digging into her head, but for some reason, her body, her brain, didn't process the pain in real life the way you would think you would, like wake up because something's happening to you. Instead, the thing that was happening in real life to Simone's head kind of manifested itself in this dream. So we basically believe Simone was already having a nightmare. She's in this post-apocalyptic landscape, and then something in real life began happening to her head, and it entered her dream. That was the crown of thorns. Well, the real thing that was happening was a fox had snuck into the camp, or it was living in the forest, wandered up to Simone, and began eating her scalp. And it sat there and ate her head and took at least 20 solid bites out of her head before the pain in real life that had manifested in her dream got so extreme that Simone bolted upright, and her sitting upright scared the fox off. And almost certainly that is the thing she saw scurrying off into the forest. And she was rushed to the hospital. She would be saved. And they actually were able to suture her scalp all back together again. And they hid the scars in her hairline. But I spoke to Simone, so I mentioned there was a connection to our community. She might even be listening to this, to be honest. Simone posted this story on our subreddit. It was about her and this experience. You know, she described this whole story and how after it happened, she was so traumatized that she not only could not go back in that forest ever again, but she couldn't go into any forests anymore. I mean, it's like true PTSD. And she says she still has phantom pain, you know, where the fox bit her head. And she also said that because it was a fox, she had to go through this insane like rabies protocol. Rabies is a lethal, you know, disease you can get from animals that have it. Yeah. It's treatable, but she had all these shots she had to get. I mean, it was like this horrible experience, but she lived, and she's one of our amazing members of the strange, dark, and mysterious community. And so, yeah, that story is a wild one, and it's one of the stories in our graphic novel here. Just to show that image again. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty good. Go to cam 2, see if you can zoom in on that again. That's I can't show too much, but here's what you get to see. Pretty good stuff. Pretty cool.
Pretty goddamn cool.
Hey everybody, if you haven't heard yet,
Pretty goddamn cool, man. If you ain't got your MrBallen book on pre-order yet, put it on pre-order, man. It costs like $25 on Amazon, y'all. I've been pre-ordered mine months ago. I've been waiting on October the 1st. But as far as this story, man, see, this why I was saying earlier, man. I don't know about y'all, but me personally, I'm gonna stay in this tent. I'm not finna bring my cot out. We already outside, but I'm not finna go outside. I'm gonna stay outside, but inside my damn tent. You know what I'm saying, man? So the damn foxes won't just come randomly eating on my head. And it's so crazy, man. And right now, I can't even think of a great example to give y'all about this. Other than this, and I ain't even trying to be funny, man. I'm just keeping it real. This the best example I can give y'all. And I've had other experiences like this too. But that's thing about what happens in your dreams sometimes could be merging or manifesting to reality or vice versa. It happens in a lot of different ways, and this the one example I'm gonna give y'all. I ain't trying to be funny, and I ain't trying to embarrass myself. I'm just keeping it real. There have been times where I'll be dreaming about peeing, about peeing, about doing the number one, about pissing. Long story short, short story long. There'll be times where I be thinking about using the bathroom, y'all. No matter where I'm at a restroom, and I'm about to let some water go out the pee-pee. And I will literally start peeing in bed while I'm having that dream, y'all. I ain't the only one. Being team, don't lie now. Do not lie to me. Some of y'all have had that happen to you too, man. Where you be thinking about, or you be having a dream and you just randomly start peeing in a grocery store or a gas station, restroom or whatever. Then you actually start doing it in real life. It had happened to me, man. And it's some other stuff that has happened within dreams that kind of like get manifested into real life or vice versa. I start thinking about or something that's happening to me while I'm asleep. It start going into my dreams. But for that to happen to her, that is freaking crazy, man. That's a next level. That ain't got nothing to do with taking a number one right there. That got to do with, oh my God, what is going on? Seriously, glad he freaking survived though. And all these stories was crazy, y'all. For the most part, I think I remember some of them. I know I remember a couple of them, but it was nice to hear MrBallen tell them again because I couldn't even remember what was the plot twist for real at the end of these. And I'm not gonna go back through all of them because if I start going back through all of them, we gonna be right here another freaking 30 minutes, and we already been here over an hour ago. So all I'm gonna say is the man, the myth, the legend has done it again, my friends. And I'll see y'all very soon. But until then, my friends, I need y'all to hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and do all that if you ain't did that yet. And also, remember this. Love, peace, and happiness. Stay safe. Don't stop. Keep going. Yeah.